Oh, yeah, it's the State of Combat podcast on CBS Sports with your boy, the Brian Campbell, and the UFC Hall of Famer, Sugar Rashad Evans, coming back at you. Preview time, UFC 240 this Saturday in Edmonton, Alberta on pay-per-view. Rashad, we got a top-heavy card here. 2 fights we need to see. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing great, man. Those 2 fights you're talking about that we need to see are some exciting fights indeed.
May not be the deepest card we've ever seen from the UFC. I guess you can call it an in-between pay-per-view, how that goes. But this is on Canadian soil. And Rashad, correct me if I'm wrong, but in 2013, you traveled to Winnipeg, of all places, to take on the great Dan Henderson. Is it true what they say about Canadian MMA fans? Is it just different across that border?
It is just different, and especially in Winterpeg, as they call it. The Canadian fans, they give a different energy. They don't get a lot of fights out there, so when they get the fights out there, they're very excited, and they bring that energy to the fights, and you can feel it once you hit the arena.
Well, if you are listening to our podcast right now, the audio version of the State of Combat, we invite you to check out this video preview on YouTube as we break it down. UFC 240 coming right at you. Rashad, we start right at the top in this main event. Heck of an interesting fight from the idea of storylines. Featherweight championship on the line. Max Holloway defending against the legend himself, the former UFC lightweight champion, Frankie Edgar. I mentioned storylines, though. How much, in your eyes, is the idea that Max Holloway, yes, he's the champ, but coming off a loss when he moved up earlier this year to attempt to challenge Dustin Poirier for that interim lightweight title, lost a somewhat brutal, very competitive, though, 5-round decision. How much should we be leery, on the lookout of what kind of Max we see this Saturday?
Well, this is the best possible Max that Frankie could fight, meaning the fact that he's not coming in off that high, not coming in off that indomitable spirit, not coming in off that run that he's been on. He's been knocked down a bit. He's been able to, I guess, mentally get around the fact that, of his loss and being able to face it and say all the right things. But there's a different actually being inside the octagon. When you're inside the octagon and you're in there with somebody who, he knows that you lost your last fight, and, he wants to put you in those positions where you start to doubt yourself again. That's what Max is going to be facing. And he's going against a guy in Frankie Edgar who's a veteran and really good at implementing his game plan and exposing people to I guess, fight out of their game plan. And that's one thing Max is going to have to get back to. How does he get back to the same Max that we've seen, the one who, throws those combinations like he does and put people into their trick bag?
Yeah, it is really interesting because let's not forget here, it was just, a year ago where we were a little bit concerned about Max's health going forward. He had pulled out of back-to-back fights. We know what happened when he was supposed to fight Brian Ortega that time during International Fight Week a year ago. Unexplainable in terms of how he pulled out. He slurred his speech on that TV interview. I was worried coming into his return last year of what he might look like. He certainly shushed us all up in the brutal and dominant fashion in which he turned the tables on Brian Ortega. But like I mentioned, then he moves up in weight in a move that I didn't think really needed to happen because of how deep the lightweight division was. But he certainly lent his star and went for it, fought admirably against Dustin Poirier. But I think, at least for now, until maybe he makes a decision to go to 155 full-time and builds up his body, he just didn't seem to have the firepower on that level to get over the hump against Poirier. So now I'm sort of in this torn in between. How much should we worry about Max Holloway? If you ask him, he's never worried, it seems. He's always chilling. He's always bringing up that 10th island he loves in Toronto. But this is going to be interesting. But it's also against 37-year-old Frankie Edgar. So, Rashad, I'm not here to disrespect a true legend in Frankie Edgar, who one day will be putting on that Hall of Fame jacket and joining you in immortality. But answer me this truthfully. Is this the closest thing Max Holloway in the UFC could get on the title level to a get-well fight?
That's a tough sell, right? the get-well fight. I don't know if I'll say it's a get-well fight, being the fact that Frankie Edgar is a very dangerous fight. But I will say that he does fit into Max's skill set very well. He's a shorter fighter. Max will have the reach over him, and Max will be able to use his reach in grappling situations that give him an advantage. So you can see him getting in situations like arm triangles and scrambling situations that could, aid to Max and cause Frankie some problems. So those are the things that can give Frankie some problems and goes to the side of Max. But when it comes to heart and determination, you can't sell Frankie short in this area. I think that's one thing that Frankie does come. He does come and, he comes with his heart and he brings it to the fight. But as you're saying, heart is just one aspect of this, very complex MMA puzzle. And even though he may have the heart, when it comes to skill, Max Holloway just, he has that size, he has that pressure, he has the striking ability, and he gets stronger as a fight goes on. Those are all going to be problems that Frankie Edgar is going to have to solve, and it's going to be a tough uphill battle for Frankie, being the fact that he is a smaller fighter and he does have to take Max to the ground, and he does have to fight that well-rounded MMA fight up and down. That's the only way I see Frankie Edgar winning a fight like this, being able to fight a very fluid fight from up and down, being able to keep Max not knowing what he's going to do.
Crazy, like you use terms that are correct. The smaller fighter in Frankie Edgar. It's crazy that this man was once the lightweight king, fighting, seemingly well above his weight, considering we've seen him go down as low as featherweight. But that shows you the greatness in him. And obviously, I meant no disrespect. I mean, revisit his collaborations with the great Gray Maynard and all the great memories that Frankie has given us. The whole question is, does he have one more? But the idea of not a get-well fight, but not a soft fight. But here's the deal. Frankie Edgar may be in this spot. I know they tried to book this fight already twice, and it didn't happen because of different reasons. But maybe Frankie Edgar, because of his name, really adds a punch and a boost to this card, which isn't the deepest card. Maybe there's other guys in that division a little more, I don't know if deserving is the right word, maybe more dangerous. But this matchup is what it is, and it's a great opportunity for Frankie Edgar. So,
but BC, you almost acting as if Frankie Edgar didn't deserve this. Listen.
Tough. It's a hot
tough.
Division, Rashad. You got to give him that. It's a hot division, right?
It is a hot division, but when it comes to it, Frankie Edgar did lose a fight against Brian Ortega that was supposed to be his fight to fight for the title, and then he had that injury and stuff like that. But Frankie is one of the premier guys in the weight class. When you're talking about the top guys in the weight class, you're talking about Frankie Edgar. So I don't think that this title fight is I guess uncalled for. I think it's very called for. I think that Frankie Edgar, definitely deserves the shot.
I think it's a smart move. However you look at it, by the way, it is smart matchmaking, I think, in a lot of ways. I think UFC wants to see exactly where Max is at right now. And obviously, if Frankie Edgar should pull this upset, you've got another storyline that I do want to get to in a second. But let's talk about Frankie Edgar, this version of him. You did mention that knockout loss to Brian Ortega in the first round 2 fights ago. We can't ignore that happened. He did come back and beat Cub Swanson, but now he enters this fight out of the cage for a full year. We know the age. We know sort of the concerns for a smaller fighter who has relied so much on speed as a boxer and in his takedown game through the years. So I want to ask you, what version are you expecting of Frankie Edgar? But I also want to ask you, how has he been able to sort of elongate his career and extend it on the elite level when, like I mentioned, smaller fighters don't tend to age that well?
Well, let me start with the last one. He's been able to stay consistent and been able to stay in the game for so long just because he doesn't stop. I trained with Frankie Edgar for a couple of years in New Jersey, and Frankie Edgar has a work regimen outside of his training camps that allows him to be able to stay active and ready when it comes time to him to fight. So he's not allowing himself to get out of shape. He's always in shape, and that allows a fighter to stay, ready. But it does cause some problems when it comes to the wear and tear on the body, which you've seen him have to take some time off for the injury. But I do see Frankie, because he's been able to stay consistent, he's been able to grow and get better and grow with the level of competition. Coming into this fight, what do I expect from Frankie Edgar? Well, he's had some time, and he's had some time to work on some of the things that give him problems. He has problems sometimes with taller guys, and it gets harder to get them off his feet. So he's been working with different taller athletes to help get them down on the ground on his wrestling and stuff like that. He has to beat Magomed Shapirov in his weight class and in his camp. That actually helps him a lot when it has to go against guys like Max Holloway, who are very tall. But what am I expecting from Frankie? Frankie is, he's coming to this fight very confident. But at the same time, he's coming to this fight very hungry to the point where he knows that this is the fight that he has to win in order for him to, I guess, even get a chance to, hold that belt one more time. So this is a big fight for Frankie Edgar. I'm expecting him to come out full blast. He's going to have to address a lot of the issues that got away from him in the Brian Ortega fight, which is range, which is actually flow of the fight. And that's something that you rarely see Frankie Edgar get in trouble with, the flow of the fight. He's going to have to get back into the flow of the fight. By that I mean going top to bottom, keeping the guys on the horns of the dilemma, not knowing what he's going to do from punching to going from wrestling. That's a Frankie Edgar that can beat a Max Holloway.
Now, look, you're just fresh off sort of the twilight, the ending of your career, and then of your subsequent induction into the Hall of Fame just in July. So when you're in the end of your career, and obviously for Frankie, he's on the title level, congratulations, but this is the second half. This is sort of the cherry on top on the great run he's already had. Is it tough to balance where physically some of your speed, your explosiveness has to be gone, but you're smarter than ever? So is it sort of a mindset shift when you enter fights like this where you've got to be much more efficient and smarter than you've ever been in your early days, where you could make up for mistakes just on being athletic and young?
Yeah, it's definitely a mind shift, and you have to know that as a fighter. You have to know that where your skills were before and where they are right now. As an older fighter, what you have to do is you have to just kind of take a reevaluation of what you can still do. And when it comes to Frankie Edgar, okay, you're an older fighter, you can't take the shots that you used to. So now you have to, use more of a grappling base offensive game. Randy Couture was very good at how he was able to fight in his later career, how he kept the guys against a wall and brawl position, and always was going for that grappling position, which allowed him to not take so many shots. I think that's a very good tactic for somebody who's an older fighter. Frankie Edgar has that ability as well to, fight from that position where he's striking and then going from the grappling position, and then once a grappling is contestant, he can strike again and get back into a grappling position. But just that's what I mean by the flow of the fight. Once you get older, you understand the flow of the fight to know that I can take some shots, but I can't take way too many, and I shouldn't take too many. That's just the truth of the matter. You don't want to take too many shots. And Frankie Edgar, he should punch, get to a grappling-based position, wall the brawl, or make Max punch him, and then he can go back and get a takedown. It would be a lot easier for him.
We certainly know what's at stake here for Max Holloway. He wins. It's business back at featherweight, same as it ever was after that one-off at lightweight. There's certainly a group of strong contenders on the way up. The Alexander Volkanovskis, Brian Ortega reloading, Zabit. I mean, there are some names that are coming if Holloway's going to extend this reign at 145. But Rashad, before getting off of this fight, we have to talk about what would happen if the great Frankie Edgar did pull the upset. Because I like to say there's a difference here between being a legend, which Frankie Edgar, former lightweight champion, given us so many great wars, so much courage and heart, already a legend. This is gravy. Congratulations on a great career, Frankie. See you in Vegas one day. But tell me if I'm wrong here, Rashad. There's a difference between legend and all-time great upper room territory. And if Frankie wins on Saturday, straight up, he's a two-division champion and not a cheapened two-division champion where sometimes fighters move up one fight. GSP, for example, I'm not going to say that was cheapened, but you get what I mean. He moved up to middleweight for one fight, fought an aging champion, and then walked away for good. So I only mean from the standpoint of it's hard to really judge who he was as a middleweight. Frankie Edgar's been fighting the best in featherweight for a long time now. What the heck do we do with him historically? I mean, this may move him up into a much higher tax bracket when you talk about the greatness in his career.
Absolutely. I think if he wins this fight, I think it goes to show, the legacy of Frankie Edgar and what he's been able to do. And I think it goes and puts him on the scale, or I guess the same plateau as you would say some of the greats as a Demetrius Johnson, as a Daniel Cormier, as those champs, you know what I'm saying? Those guys who who went out there and continued to raise the bar of what it means to be a champion. You know, Frankie Edgar does have that, in my opinion, even without having the belt, because of the fact that, you know, he's been able to stay so competitive even in the weight class once he dropped down. It's so hard to stay ranked as long as Frankie Edgar has been in the UFC. He's been in the top 10, the top 5 at 155, dropped down to 145, and he's been in the top 5 there his whole entire career there. So it's been, you know, a guy who may have not tasted the gold for the second time, but he's been putting in gold-winning performances.
No question about it. It's sort of a sneaky potential feel-good story. We love when the older guys have these giant moments. Manny Pacquiao winning a big pay-per-view fight past weekend at 40. Daniel Cormier moving up to heavyweight. I love me some old guy action, especially a guy such a good guy as Frankie Edgar. But let's talk about what actually happens in that cage on Saturday night. Max Holloway, the favorite for a reason. I feel like if Frankie's going to win this fight, a lot of the breakdown you said makes a lot of sense. He's got to take the fight to the ground, but Max's takedown defense is some of the best we see in the UFC. And if this turns into a full-on boxing match for 5 rounds, Rashad, I have trouble seeing Frankie get over that hill. I don't think he gets finished, but I think this is one of those clean, comfortable 5-round wins for Max Holloway where Frankie makes him work, but you know who's the taller, longer, younger, at this moment, more superior fighter when all is said and done. How do you see it?
Well, I think you have a lot of good points. You know, I think the biggest concern for me is the fact that, you know, Max, once he gets dangerously moving forward with those punching combinations coupled with his reach and just his ability to fight with that free form, and by free form, I mean just taking whatever the opponent throws at him and just throwing it back at him in a way that the opponent never sees coming. I think Max has the ability to cause a lot of problems for Frankie just on the initial getting in. What I see Frankie being able to cause Max having some problems with getting to the ankles, that stop and go motion, just being so quick. I think those are the things that Frankie's going to have to be able to do. With all that said, I think that Max is going to go out there and implement his game plan. You know, I love Frankie Edgar, and a big part of me is pulling for Frankie. But if I'm just putting my analyst hat on here and not going with the whole friend thing, I would say that Max gets this one.
Stoppage? Decision?
Nah, I would say decision. I would say it's decision. I think that Frankie's going to be able to contest, and Frankie's going to be able to put some problems out there for Max, hard problems for Max to solve. And I don't think Max is going to be able to solve them to the point where he finishes them. But I think that he will get a decision.
All right, we mentioned this was a top-heavy UFC 240 card this Saturday. That co-main event is very interesting when we look at former women's featherweight champion and one of the greatest fighters in MMA history, CRIS CYBORG Justino. First fight back since losing her title to Amanda Nunes in December, taking on upstart Felicia Spencer. A lot of things going on around this fight, Rashad, when you look at the great Cyborg is on the last fight of her current UFC deal. With a win, does she come back and re-sign and get that rematch with Amanda Nunes, which would do big business and would really have a lot we could still learn from it? Or does she play the market, play the field, go to Bellator, go pro boxing, go pro wrestling? She seems to have a lot of interest if you follow her on Twitter and really wants to see what her true value is. But to get there, she's got a challenger here who's never lost in the UFC, looked really good in that debut against Megan Anderson earlier this year, and then called out Cyborg. You got her, Felicia Spencer, native of Montreal, in her home country here. How close on paper is this fight in your eyes?
It's a really close on paper, but it's more close, you know, if you take a off paper, you know, the emotional content of the fight is closer to me because of the simple fact that this is a Cyborg we've never seen before. We've seen her, you know, being the dominant fighter who coming into a fight and having most of her opponents beat before she even enters the octagon. But this is a different Cyborg. This is a Cyborg who's coming in off a loss, a devastating loss at that. Now, as somebody who's have suffered some devastating loss, the next fight is always the hardest fight. Now she's stepping in there with the Felicia Spencer, who's coming off a great debut and who is an Invicta champion and who believes that she can win. Matter of fact, she called Cyborg out. So it's a different type of fight for Cyborg. You know, now she's once again the hunted, and you know, we've seen what happened when she was a hunted before, with Amanda Nunes, it didn't turn out so well. So for her, it's going to be, you know, a lot of overcoming that Amanda Nunes fight, a lot of overcoming those skeletons in the closet that she had to deal with on an emotional level from those fights, you know, and then to couple that off with the fact that, you know, she hasn't been on the best terms with the organization. She doesn't feel like she's getting the support from the UFC, you know, and she's been looking at the options outside of the UFC. So that to me spells a lot of discontent. That to me spells a lot of unfocusedness when it comes to the task at hand. You know, I could be totally wrong. This could propel her to make her super, super focused. But when you have so many of these things just coming together, to me, it just creates the perfect storm.
Yeah, you nailed what are the questions coming in that she's facing. I mean, let's not forget, we've never seen her have to do this. She lost her pro debut and then went on that incredible run as one of the pioneers, or the pioneer, along with Gina Carano, of women's MMA. She lasted at the top level as the pound for pound queen for such a very long time before that loss. And even in that loss, if we're going to be honest, I mean, she lost to the greatest of all time, Amanda Nunes, but she also seemed to be lured into a brawl, not the finest hour from a game plan strategy in terms of that. So it's almost like you do want to see that rematch again to see what would happen if she fought a little bit differently. I will give her this credit, though, Rashad. I love watching how athletes respond to defeats, especially big-time stars in the fight game who have so much built up, so much confidence, so much, you know, aura and legacy around them. I always say this about Conor McGregor, how he handled that loss to Nate Diaz the first time around at UFC 196. People should watch a video on that in terms of saying the right things, having the right mindset, wanting to come right back into a rematch. What I saw in Los Angeles in December covering that fight, UFC 232, CYBORG was as humble and honest and open. She went to the press conference afterwards, you know, and you never know if somebody gets flushed out in one round like that, or do they want to face the truth, face the media. She willingly and openly did that and said, look, like, I wasn't trying to go undefeated. I lost my pro debut. I was just trying to be the best. I got caught in a brawl. I tried to win it. I lost. I'm going to come back even stronger. So having seen that, it does give me confidence into who she is entering this fight. But there's a lot of unknowns on the flip side about Felicia Spencer. She's just the most recent Invicta featherweight champion. CYBORG, the first ever Invicta featherweight champion. So a little bit of odd Invicta history there. But do we really know how good Spencer is? Does Felicia Spencer know how good she actually is? Are we going to say bye, Felicia, on Saturday? Or is this the beginning of a new player in this division and maybe CYBORG taking a step out? A lot to think about here.
Absolutely, and Felicia Spencer is somebody people should definitely get excited for. I mean, when it comes to jiu-jitsu in the game and top pressure, and, you know, I think that she stands head and shoulders above a lot of women in the division just because of the simple fact that when she gets women to the ground, she puts a pressure on that you rarely see in women's MMA. And not only does she put the pressure on top, she has great control to land some devastating ground and pound. And her ground and pound is devastating as well too. So these are aspects where we really don't see CYBORG in. You know, we got her going against someone who can take her down to the ground and put her into a whole world where we haven't really seen her, you know, at, you know, and now we have somebody who can dominate her in that area. So it's going to be interesting to see how does she respond to that. How does she respond to, you know, having someone with such a strong level of grappling over her. You know, so normally in CYBORG fights, you know, she's the dominant one in almost every aspect of the fight. And it's going to be interesting to see how Felicia Spencer is able to implement that very dominating, heavy style grappling game. And then here's another thing. She's excited. She's excited to be there. She wants to be there. She's got that newness in her eyes. When a young athlete has that newness on her eyes and you're the next in line, you better watch out and you better bring a little extra intensity just to deal with that alone, because they haven't experienced what you know, what CYBORG have experienced or anyone in that position have experienced yet. So for them, it's the biggest moment of their life. And they're coming with that energy.
You just nailed that part, because if we're honest about Cyborg's run in the UFC, there hasn't been people that have gone out of their way to want to fight her. There's been a lot of people pulling out due to injuries or just outright avoiding her. I mean, Jermaine Durandamy, for whatever reason you want to say in the end, whether it was fear of improper drug testing or not, she gave up the title to avoid fighting Cyborg. So it's different when you're fighting a Tanya Evinger, a Yana Kunitskaya, if I pronounce that correctly, who are just sort of there because they got the opportunity and there's no one else. Felicia Spencer actually looks like somebody who's hungry, has skills, wants to be there. But you nailed one key part. You never want to call Cyborg a front runner, because she's not, but she's been in the front, running away from most of her opponents throughout her career, typically in boxing matches inside the cage. I can't even remember the last time, Rashad, I've seen Cyborg's takedown defense or let alone her grappling game be a part of the narrative. I mean, am I missing in my short memory here recent times that somebody's tried to expose her on the ground? I can't remember somebody even getting to that point.
No, you're absolutely right. And then when she has been on the ground, sometimes those exchanges haven't always, gone her way, meaning the fact that her positioning hasn't always been what it should have been to get out of those exchanges. Sometimes she just kind of gets out because she's strong. And I'm not trying to take anything away from her game, but if there is one aspect of Cyborg's game, it would be the grappling. And I've always said that. So now she's with somebody who can grapple at that level, and it's going to be a tough test for her. But I think the biggest test for her is just being able to harness her emotions in order to get that performance that we're used to seeing from her.
Quick sidebars. Rashad, in your heart of hearts, at peak Ronda Rousey, like peak, like blowing through, I don't know, Katzengano in 4.5 seconds, whatever it was. If they had made that super fight and found a middleweight, who would have won that, Cyborg or Rousey back then? When basically Rousey had that one thing that we're saying we don't see Cyborg have to defend.
Yeah, I would definitely have to say it's close. It's close. It's really close, because at that point, Rousey's stand-up wasn't what it was towards the end that made her really confident. But one thing that was good is that clutch on the ground, her knowing how to find a submission anywhere you put it. So with that said, I would have to say a young Rousey who really, really believed in herself. The young Rousey who believed in herself was how dangerous was a young Rousey who believed in herself? She was super dangerous.
That is true. Coach Edmond to the house. Wow. Yes. All right. Rashad, interesting bit of note here. Felicia Spencer is going to pull the upset. Her coach, they're telling me in my ear, is the silverback himself, Seth Petroselli of pink hair fame, of knocking out Kimbo Slice with a jab, and Gus Johnson saying the biggest upset in martial arts history. Gus, you can take that. You can take that L, Gus, on CBS. You could take that L back in the day. But hey, maybe Seth, maybe whispers in the air. He's been here before, I think. Yeah.
I mean, listen, she got a great coach in Seth Petroselli, and Seth is, phenomenal with his stand-up, and he understands the grappling game as well too. And she has great toolage there. But at the same time, CRIS Cyborg is coming back, and I think that this Cyborg that we see. Even with all of the things that I said before, with all of the distractions that she may have coming into this fight, I think that those distractions are not going to hinder her, and they're going to actually propel her. And I think they're going to make her go out there and fight a fight that we all can remember. And that's the thing that I like most about Cyborg, is that she has that ability to face herself. You know how hard it is as an athlete. When you set the stage like a Cyborg, and then you have that stumble, and then you have people saying everything they say about you, and then to have to get back on that and face yourself, that right there is the fight. For that, I commend her so much, and for that, I believe she's going to win.
I mean, Rashad, you came off of that title knockout loss to Machida, and correct me if I'm wrong, you went right into the Rampage fight, right?
It was a Thiago Silva fight and then a Rampage fight. But those are two tough fights to have, hop back into. And both of those fights, I experienced a moment in the third round where I almost lost both of those fights. And I remember the feeling that I had right when it happened in the third round. Oh no, not again, not again. And that's the trauma that happens when you have these fights where you get knocked out in devastating fashion. You feel good, and then it's the moment in the fight where you get caught, and then all of a sudden you start to have these flashbacks of what happened last fight, and you're like, oh, not again, not again, not again, and then that's when you can go into a shell.
Well, how this one breaks out, I got to go with Cyborg here. I wonder if Felicia Spencer's confidence sometimes can play against you. Sometimes it could lead to your exit if you take chances, if you maybe don't respect what's across the way coming back at you as much. I just feel like for Cyborg, yeah, she may have options outside the cage. I hope she gets a chance to really cash in. She's been a great ambassador for the sport. But to me, the fight in terms of legacy is running Amanda Nunes, the greatest of all time, back. And Rashad potentially beating her. So you can say, hey, Amanda, you're fantastic. People thought you were the greatest of all time for a short season, but I've always been the greatest, and I'm going to prove it to you. To me, if that's ahead of her on the highway, looking out at the distance, she's going to focus, she's going to take care of Felicia Spencer, and she's going to re-sign and come back. That's me talking for her, but that's what I'd like to see.
I totally agree, and what you said is pretty much the way I think, because the simple fact is this: there's not that many blockbuster fights for this women division, and now you have two great athletes in Amanda Nunes and another in CRIS CYBORG, where we can put them back together again and have another great fight. But I think that CRIS CYBORG's story needs to be told more. I think that people need to understand who CRIS CYBORG is. And I think if they got behind her with a little bit of media, with a little bit of press, and really got people to learn about who this person is, because you don't really know who CRIS CYBORG is. No one really knows who CRIS CYBORG is. I got a chance to hang out with her a couple times and get to spend some time with her, and I was kind of blown away because she was one of the sweetest persons that I ever met in my life, and it was, and I was blown away because I didn't see it. I didn't see it coming. So I think that if they got behind her more, told her story, I think they would get a different response on how much people would receive her and how much they can actually package and sell her.
Absolutely. I feel like there's almost like a Fedor aura with her, but the closer we can get to her, the more you see of her, the more you like. So those are the two big ones. Let's check out the rest of this main card with our picks here, Rashad. Give me one reason to stay here, or I'll turn right back around. Give me a fight I should care about this Saturday on UFC 240. Check it out right there.
Okay. I like that, the Neal and the Price fight. I think that's going to be a great fight. You know, both of these guys, they both have a lot of squabble in them. You know, Nico Price is one of those guys who definitely has a lot of star potential, and then you have Jeff Neal, who is one of those guys who's on 5-fight win streak. I mean, this guy's definitely got big opportunity, huge opportunity.
Absolutely. I mean, buried on this preliminary card, I don't hate that flyweight bout, by the way. Pantoja against Davison Figueiredo. That should be some high flying on the ground, if you will, if that made any sense. Probably didn't. But that's our UFC 240 preview coming at you from the great Hall of Famer himself, Sugar Rashad Evans. I'm Brian Campbell. As always, if you're watching the video version of this, check out our State of Combat podcast every week on CBS Sports. Separate episodes for boxing, mixed martial arts, and pro wrestling. You won't want to miss it. Rashad, you got any message for the people heading into 240 here?
No message. Just be ready to watch the phenomenal Max Holloway get down with Frankie Edgar. I think that is going to be a phenomenal fight. It's hard to pick a winner in that fight, to be honest. You know, I'm a Frankie Edgar fan, and you know, a big part of me is pulling for Frankie, man. But it's going to be a good one. It's going to
be worth watching. Maybe some old guy magic. We will find out. Thanks so much for watching this. State of Combat coming at you in your ear hole, this time on camera. Enjoy. Thank you.